Retaliatory tariffs against the U.S. have come swiftly from Mexico and Canada, but China has chosen a different path. It has decided to make its point at the World Trade Organization. And as one Beijing-based analyst told us, the WTO's capacity to resolve disputes might have diminished in recent years. But Beijing's lawsuit buys China time to negotiate.
Basically, WTO can do nothing because WTO used to have a panel consisting of 7 or 9 judges. Now that panel is empty. There's no judges. There's no judges in the committee. So the WTO is now a tiger without teeth. Okay, so WTO virtually can do nothing against the U.S. Violation of its commitment to WTO. But it's a very good move for the Chinese side to first go to WTO to show the rest of the world that the U.S. is now undercut the world international order. China is commanding the high moral ground. So it's a good move as a way to wait for the future negotiations with the U.S.
For more on these growing trade tensions, Stephen Olson, visiting fellow ISEAS-Yusof Ishak Institute, joins us live. Mr. Olson, we just heard there. So Canada and Mexico, they have counter tariffs, or rather Canada has moved ahead with them. Mexico has a plan B that will include retaliatory tariffs. China, meanwhile, which surely has the larger firepower, is choosing instead, as we just heard from the analyst, to buy time to see what happens. Is this a suggestion that, at least from Beijing's point of view, this is just tough talk from the United States?
Well, look, I think it's a foregone conclusion that filing the WTO case will have virtually zero practical impact. It's a foregone conclusion that the Trump administration will either ignore the panel decision or they'll simply appeal it into the oblivion because the appellate body is no longer working. Nonetheless, I do think it's a shrewd move from China's point of view, as the rivalry between the U.S. as they compete for global influence, it allows China to position itself as the defender of the global order and the United States as a sort of reckless rule breaker. The fact that they haven't moved immediately to a more forceful response, I don't think there's any question that they're still prepared to do that. There's no rush to make a more forceful response, and taking a little bit of time to pursue a WTO case does allow China to, as I said, position itself as the defender of the global order.
Mr. Olson, the difficulty, of course, with these tariffs is their professed aim, which was rhetorically at least to address fentanyl, but there are other issues such as addressing a trade balance, addressing immigration issues, funding tax revenues, so a range of issues which tariffs may or may not actually be able to fix. Given that that is the case, is there any deal that can be signed realistically by any leader, even assuming their domestic constituencies are sufficiently pliant to allow this? Is there any deal that can reasonably be reached to fend off these tariffs?
Well, I think you make a good point. These trade actions are being taken to address issues which really don't have anything to do with trade. But again, Trump approaches things from a very transactional point of view. I think he would be perfectly content if he could strike some type of deal which allows him to declare victory on the fentanyl issue, on the immigration issues. I think he'd be perfectly happy to forego the tariffs, but he would have to extract sufficient concessions from the 3 countries involved.
And we saw in 2019, Mexico made sufficient concessions, at least from Mr. Trump's point of view, in his first term. A common understanding on some new measures. Is there a hope this time, or is Mexico hoping that they might be able to reach a similar deal as they did in 2019 to fend off tariffs?
I think they are. But look, it's going to be a difficult line to tread, and we understand that Trump is strongly fixated on this issue. So it remains to be seen, but the negotiations I expect to be tough.
Oh, you yourself, you negotiated, you were on the US team to negotiate NAFTA in 1994. Of course, that was then thrown out and renegotiated under the first Trump administration to become the USMCA. So you are aware of the necessary back and forth in talks like these. Why are you particularly pessimistic on what's happening in these moves from the Trump administration?
Well, I think at a certain point, you have to ask yourself, what is the point of having a free trade agreement with a partner that ignores the rules and takes measures which really create industrial disintegration for a North American industry that's already been largely integrated? I think it's fair at a certain point to pose, if in fact these tariffs do go ahead as they're scheduled very shortly, I think it's fair to ask the question, do we really, for all intents and purposes, continue to have a NAFTA or a USMCA agreement in place?
A final question, Mr. Olson. Picking up on the original point, so the WTO being a tiger without teeth. In a way, the WTO has teeth simply because up to a point, it's self-enforcing. You look to countries that can afford to break the laws, to choose not to break the laws. When you see the world's largest economy doing as it might choose on world trade regulation, the cost is others might follow suit as well. And that is perhaps what China is banking on. Is there any great loss beyond just loss to GDP growth, loss to consumer prices rising? Is there a far greater loss we're looking at right now?
I think over the longer term, actually, the more significant fallout from these actions could be that they create another devastating blow against that rules-based global trade system that we've had in place since the end of the Second World War. It's been a primary driver of economic and growth and development around the world. It could be in real jeopardy if we start moving back towards a sort of law of the jungle, big fish eat those small fish type of environment. You look at a country like Singapore. Singapore's remarkable economic development is largely a function of globalization, free trade, and deep integration. And there are a lot of countries in the world that have also benefited from that system as well.
All right, thanks so much for joining us this evening. Stephen Olson, visiting fellow at ISEAS-Yusof Ishak Institute.